Hi guys, it's Mrs. Moss here, and we're going to start looking at the process of weathering. Now, when I talk about weathering, I'm not talking about sunny skies or cloudy skies. When I'm talking about weathering, I'm talking about a process that occurs with the Earth's surface. So let's look at this a little bit more. What do these three things have in common? The Grand Canyon, sand, and a statue. Well, they've all been weathered. What is weathering? It is the physical and chemical processes that can change a rock. When we talk about weathering, it has to be the rocks have to be exposed to air, the atmosphere, water, the hydrosphere, and or human activities or animals. Now, let's look at physical weathering. There are many different types of physical weathering. The physical weathering, or sometimes it's known as mechanical weathering, is when rocks are broken into smaller pieces without changing the chemical nature of that rock. So it's a larger rock and it gets changed into a smaller rock. Like this. See how the rock has split from one larger piece now into two smaller pieces? That's an example of physical weathering. Here's another split rock. It's kind of cool the way it split together like that. And even another picture of a split rock. Now there are different ways that rocks can be weathered mechanically. The first one we're going to look at is through frost action or ice wedging. Now the alternate freezing and thawing of water creates the water to go into a solid and then back into a liquid. Solid, back into a liquid. And the important thing about this is that when water freezes, it expands. In fact, it can expand up to 10%. I don't know if any of you have experienced what's going on in this picture, but if you notice, if you put a glass juice or a glass liquid inside a jar in the freezer, because the liquid will expand, that jar could break. And that's actually what happens with our Earth's surface. With frost action, as the water freezes and it expands, it will split apart any crack that's already existing in that rock, and it will make that rock break into smaller pieces. So it's not just the frost action, it's not just the freezing motion where it expands, but it's also the thawing of it too. It's that process of freezing and then thawing, because once it thaws back into a liquid, then that water size, that it contracts again, it's not expanding anymore, it contracts again, and that rock is left exposed and it's left broken. And the New York roads have many potholes because of this frost action. In the winter, then the snow gets into the ground and seeps into the roads or the cracks in the roadway. Then it freezes. The liquid rain or snow can get into the cracks. Then it freezes, causing it to expand and break apart even further. And then when it thaws into another liquid, it then leaves our roadways with lots of grooves and gaps in the road. Another way that we can have a rock physically break down is through what's called abrasion. An abrasion is running water and wind that can cause the rocks to rub against one another, and that is what wears down the larger rock into smaller pieces. Now, let's look at that both different components. We have water and we have wind that can cause abrasion. So let's look at water. When we look at the water, we think of wave action. And as you've experienced by going to the beach, we have waves that hit the sand. And if there's any surface like a wall along that shoreline, the wave will continuously hit it. And that can actually create the wall or any rock surface that's exposed to those waves to break down eventually. And here you see it along here. The other type of abrasion is wind action, and this is when sediments get dragged in the wind and hits into other larger rocks. If that continuously happens, that larger rock will wear away and wear down. And in the deserts and other areas where we have arid, dry climates, you see this tremendous, you can see Now, this is a dust storm, and it's known as a haboob. It's an Arabic word, and it's actually seen regularly in places like Arizona and in other dry areas. And it is just this big dust storm. It literally is sand and debris, and it gets caught by gravity, and it dragged along. And it can be really difficult once if you're in there. The other way that rocks can be weathered physically is through plants or roots, and that's known as plant action. Now, what happens, and you've seen this on your sidewalks, the cracks in the rock are widened by a root from a plant, and it exposes new surfaces to that rock, and then that causes it to break down even further. And believe it or not, plants can grow from the hardest of rocks. It's a different type of weathering. It breaks down the rock into smaller pieces. And now here's a picture of some examples of the trees that have grown literally through the cement and through the cracks, and the roots have created the cracks in the sidewalks and the rocks to be even larger. The last way that rocks can be physically weathered is through human activities, and that is just caused by us or animal activities. Here in this picture, we're using a bulldozer to literally draw through those larger rocks and to break them into smaller pieces. It can also happen by animals digging in the ground, where all the action of digging into those larger rocks could actually cause those rocks to break apart and create physical weathering. So what happens with physical weathering and any weathering really, if you increase the surface area of the rock, you will then increase the rate of weathering. Now let me explain this. The surface area is how many surfaces are exposed to the wind and the atmosphere and the hydrosphere and the water, okay? So if you think about how many surfaces are exposed in this first brick here on the left, let me find my mouse. There it is, right here. If you look at this first brick, it has 6 solid sides, right? And then in this second one, we've cut that same brick into fourths. But what you notice is there are more surface areas exposed, meaning the insides in between where the split is are now also exposed to the wind and the rain and every other element that could break apart the rock. So once you start to increase the amount of surfaces that are exposed, you increase the rate of weathering. Here in the last picture, there's even more surface area. More of these little surfaces are exposed to any element that could cause this rock to break down further. So the more surface area, the more fast the rock could break down. Here's another really cool picture of weathering that has occurred physically to this rock. Just literally split it in two. So therefore, breaking rocks into smaller pieces causes them to weather faster, just as we said before. And this creates a direct relationship. As you increase the surface area, you increase the rate of weathering. And we're going to stop here for right now, and we'll get into the next part of weathering in our next video. Hope you get the notes down. Have a great day. See you next time.